So let's take a look at a common scenario and let's take a look at how you would do this natively to understand a better potential option for being securely collaborative within Microsoft 365. So let's take an external user, Roy. He has access to a team. So what do we know about Roy having access to the team? Well, typically we will want to run some type of permission report that shows what his access is within Microsoft Teams. Next, we probably want to understand how long has Roy had access to files within Teams? How many times has he accessed those files? That information will be great for us to understand in terms of access permissions to adhere to some type of auditing request potentially. And finally, were the files that Roy interacted with viewed, updated? Were they sensitive in nature? That's also very important to understand. So you can see here, there's a lot of different places to really go and get this information. But this is one user. Imagine if I had to do this for 100 users, 500, 1,000, tens of thousands. That would be a lot of work for an admin or a team to really kind of sift through. That's where we come in. AvePoint Policies and Insights has been built from the ground up with AvePoint development skilled in Microsoft APIs to make collaboration more secure and easy to adhere to, easy to understand, and provide compliant reporting for auditing requirements. So we call the solution Pi for short. So what is the Pi story? The Pi story is simply giving you insights, surfacing the risk from the collaboration that occurs within your Microsoft 365 tenant. We do this very fast by being able to query the indexes that are available to us to help paint a picture, put a story together around potential exposure, access, and risk. In addition to that, we can put in proactive policies to help remediate or reduce risk in scenarios where over permissioning has been granted, an owner changes a particular setting at a team level, or an admin changes a site collection setting. We can put in proactive policies that restrict that type of behavior because it falls out of the scope of a compliant, secure collaboration workspace. And finally, this solution is fully housed or hosted in Microsoft Azure, which means the benefit of sitting very close to the Microsoft data centers where Microsoft 365 is hosted, which again speaks to speed, secure, common platform being run inside of Microsoft Azure. Okay, let's get into a live demo and talk about what the solution actually does for your practice or your customers. Okay, so here we are in the Insights portal. You can see the URL here, and I'm logged in as the persona of an administrator in this example. So first off, we have our rail of navigation on the left here. And I'm going to start at the very top, and you can see here the overview. So the overview we're greeting the user with some vital, important information about collaboration within the tenant. We call these at the top contributing factors. Contributing factors of who are the external users within my tenant that have access to content. That's very important for an organization to understand. Next, what external links have been given out to content within my tenant? That's also very important to understand. And finally, of the content, what has sensitive nature or sensitive information within that content? So as you can see here, the dashboard highlights that information and we make it very easy to dive in for further analysis within these key contributing factors. Okay. The next key area of the overview page here is what we call direct access sharing. So you can imagine a large organization, maybe you have a lot of access that's been granted to some of the default groups that are available. For example, the everyone group. Let's just share this with everyone within the organization. However, what we're sharing is sensitive in nature. So we can track where the number of sensitive items are being shared with everyone within the organization. Very important to understand. Another common group is everyone except external users. Let's highlight and track the sensitive items that have been shared with that group, so on and so forth. External users, anonymous links, and links with specific external users. Very important to understand from a direct access sharing perspective. Next, external users with the highest risk. This is also important. So I have external users that we are allowing to collaborate within our tenant, but they have access to high risk content, high risk data. So let's identify that. Let's surface that in the dashboard so that we can be informed and make the right decisions on that. We'll talk a little bit more about how we define sensitive items in just a moment. On the right here, we're currently looking at the trends. So this is important if you're wanting to really look at this from a timeline perspective to see if your risk posture is going up or down. So we can use the trending report to really track that over a period of time. There, as you can see here, and we're staying pretty flat, which is a pretty good indicator there. Like that to go down, but you get the idea for the last 7 days. We can also view this high-level dashboard from a risk matrix perspective. This is important when you have a lot of content that you really want to understand, but you also want to prioritize which content is of most important in terms of access, permissions, potential exposure versus the content that is least important, maybe not so much of a focal point for your team to investigate or triage. So we like to highlight what we call the risk matrix and give you the ability to dive in and see where areas of focus probably require some sort of action around that. And we'll talk about how we configure that in just a moment. So again, part of the dashboard highlights there. And as I scroll down, now you get to see summary information across the different, I call these modalities or services within Microsoft 365, commonly Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft 365 groups. So you can see some high level information here, and we'll dive into the specifics within each one of these in just a moment. But down here, the final pieces are, how do we understand what is sensitive? So there's two ways in which we can do it. We can do one or the other, or we can actually do both. So the first way in which we define what's sensitive is we leverage the Microsoft native sensitive info types. Every tenant within Microsoft 365 that has an E1, E3, E5 plan has sensitive info types that can be easily configured to go out and scan and look for example, a credit card number or a social security number. And so Insights queries the index that's built by Microsoft for scanning sensitive info types, and we surface that in our dashboard. So where are all the EU debit card numbers? We found them, and there's 54 of them that we were able to highlight within Insights. Depending on your customer maturity, your journey, some customers are now looking at sensitivity labels, which actually are a way in which you can define a label that controls behavior and action based upon that label definition, and then take that label and apply it to a site, a team, more specifically to an individual file that again controls things like what type of sharing can be controlled, what type of tags or encryption is used if the file leaves your tenancy, things like watermarking, headers and footers can all be configured in a sensitivity label. So with those labels defined within the security and compliance centers, Insights can see those labels and then correlate where we find those labels on content or sites, and then have Insights report on those. And so you can see here, we found the restricted label on 23 files, credit cards, so on and so forth. So we use sensitive info types and or combination of sensitivity labels to determine within your tenancy, what are your sensitive items? So how do we configure those? So let's talk about that. So if we go into settings here, so we have three main areas to configure to determine our sensitive items within our tenancy that Insights will report on. The first is sensitivity definitions. So depending upon where your customers are, um, if they are just using sensitive info types currently, then that's great. That's a great starting point for us. So typically you would say, what do you care about? What are your crown jewels? Is it personal information? Is it credit card information? Is it you're in a certain geography, you're in the UK, and maybe you're GDPR bound. So you turn on the things you care about, the sensitive crown jewels for your business practice. And what that will do is begin the process for Insights to go and look and query for those within your collaboration assets, your files, your teams, so on and so forth there. All right. Now, within there, that's the first step, right? You can actually create a new definition, for example, and you can give it a name. Let's call this demo, and country or region, depending on where you are. And then you can build this out your own, right? So you can build this out a couple different ways here. So you can say, yes, I want to leverage some of the native Microsoft sensitive info types, for example, ABA routing numbers. That's important. I'm in a financial business. Go and help me find that. Or you can leverage your sensitivity labels that you have configured in your security and compliance center. And so Insights is able to sync and see those from your tenancy and be able to use those to aggregate where the risk is found based upon that label definition where it's been applied to a file or a site. And the other option is you can build your own custom info types, similar to the out-of-the-box ones here. You can build your own based upon the KQL syntax. So you can actually create your own and have that specific to a certain pattern or data match you're looking for there. So this is how we tell Insights what's sensitive for us, and then we start to build that through the reporting that we'll be showing you more on here in a bit. Okay. Next is the exposure definitions. So now, once we understand what's sensitive for us, we need to start framing what exposure means to our business. So exposure is grouped into 3 categories. Number 1 is high exposure, medium, and low exposure. So let's take a look at what some of the options are for high exposure, for example. High exposure could be, if I have anything that's shared with an external user, and we have more than one external user, that could be high risk, coupled with something that's shared anonymously, coupled with sharing with the large everyone group. Or if I have large groups defined within my business, my local or my tenancy large groups, and users within that group are more than 30, that's also something that I want to add up as high exposure. And the final one here is share directly with multiple users and groups. And again, the number of users and groups is more than 30. So notice I have each one of these selected, which means all of these account for a cumulative high exposure level here, or any one of these could trigger that. Okay, as an example. Let's take a look at medium here. So medium, similar options here. Only difference, we're not selecting the top 3. So medium would be, I'm sharing with large groups of 20 to 30 in this example, or I'm sharing directly with users, again, 20 to 30. That's going to be my medium exposure. Anything else outside of that goes into the low exposure level. Okay, so that's how we're able to define our exposure definitions that map to what's sensitive. And now the final piece is, where do we want to focus this insight or get this insight information from within the different objects that we're collaborating with inside of Microsoft 365? For example, Teams. So the solution allows you to create logical containers that have all of your objects from within your tenant and place them into a container. We have a default container that you can use. You can create your own container. But the idea here is that now you have a logical grouping for the objects that you can then target the reporting and insights to or from there. So you can see we have that for Teams. We can do the same thing for SharePoint. So you can see if I expand this out, my SharePoint sites within my tenant here, and same thing for my OneDrives, my personal OneDrive sites. And then finally, my Microsoft 365 groups that have my sites and my group mailboxes there. All right. So these are the 3 areas that you would begin to configure to help you start the picture from, again, this overview of where is sensitive information found, where are we looking in terms of the scopes, and what are we looking for? Again, external users, external links. Okay. Now, let's get into some risk analysis. So if we click on overview here, what Insights does is begins to highlight the things that are top of mind. So for example, we default sort on high risk items. So what does that really mean? So we see we have a team here called Business Group. The privacy level, it has 5 channels, 9 members, 1 guest. But we have this concept of shadow users and groups. So what is a shadow user? A shadow user is someone that's been given access to a file, but they are not a member of the Microsoft team. So because SharePoint is still SharePoint, it has its own permission model. You can grant access to content and give that to individuals and they not be a part of the actual team. In some scenarios, that is a very valid use case scenario. So we definitely want to make users aware where, or admins, where that's happening there. So it actually has 18 high risk items. The sensitivity label has been identified and the status of this team is in an archive status. So I have some very good insights into this particular team here. Okay, let's take a look at the high risk items. So if I click on the number 18, so now I'm drilling through and getting more detailed information about what is high risk and why. So I can see several files that we have used in the collaboration within this team called Business Group here. So you can see several of the files, the type, who it was created by, the risk level, we talked about that. This is a culmination of sensitivity level and exposure level. So if you hover over the sensitivity level here, it tells us it's medium sensitivity. And the reason why is we've matched a sensitive info type of debit card number. Okay, so we did a scan, we queried, Microsoft did a scan based upon sensitive info types that we cared about. We said, go and find all the EU debit card numbers. And we said, yep, we found one in this PDF. So that's why it was flagged as sensitivity level of medium. Now, exposure level is high because it is shared to everyone. That's an extremely large group within an organization. That's everyone gets access. One external user, remember those settings we said for our high exposure level, and we're sharing it with one large group. So if we add up, think of this as kind of a cumulative score here, high exposure level with medium sensitivity level, which means the risk is high here. Okay, so I can add comments to this as I'm reviewing this as an admin, or I could select this file and start to do deeper forensics. For example, I can look at the detailed information and I can see again that high status, why it's high. But now let me look deeper and take a look at the permissions. So I can see, yep, the everyone group, one external user, large group, sharing links. But now I see the details here. And if I want to, I can even remove permissions. So select the object that I want to remove. And if it's allowed, I can actually make that action. More importantly here, if I look at activities, now we're getting into audit log type of information. So who did what on this particular file? When did they do it? That's what we're seeing in activities here. So we can see there was an app that did something on 5/17. restored some type of permission, someone previewed a file, so on and so forth. So I can see that if there's more activities, I can get even more information. So this is great. I have a single pane of glass to get some of the high level risk, the permissions, as well as the activities there. And then further details around the actual path of the file. And if I need to do things in terms of the label that's being applied, I can actually apply a label. So I can go in here and I can say, this is credit card related. So let's go ahead and apply that label. And this is my demo environment. So this is just a sample here, but you can see the action here where I can actually, if this were allowed, change the label there if I need to. Okay, so that's actually taking a look at risk analysis at a high level, but giving you the ability to dissect specific areas where maybe you need to focus in on some of the high risk items there. Risk analysis. All right. So we kind of covered the detailed records. Again, another example of that would be, again, looking at the detailed records here, and I can select those and see different pieces of information, apply sensitivity label, permissions, view activities, and see that there. Now, if I wanted to actually see more information, let's take a look at additional columns that are available to me. So, time discovered. When did Insights discover this information? Channel name, location, tag, any comments that have been applied. I can turn those columns on and get even more information that can be available for me to consume there. Now, at this point, the beauty here is that I can even export this out and give this to an auditor, a security person, a business steward, whoever needs to get a physical record of this. I can export this out into a CSV format and hand that off. Very common for regulatory requirements there. Okay. All right. So continuing on here, we talked about risk analysis, um, exposure. So this is, again, getting back to permissions, the ability to quickly investigate, find, report on where exposure has occurred and to whom. So exposed to everyone, I click on that, I can easily see that information, see what site collections are exposed to everyone. And my guess would be these are maybe some type of public teams potentially, but I can dive in and see more information about that information and why, who has access to that if I need to. All right, so let's go back here. So that's one example of exposure. Your external users. So now this is getting into some really good information around, oh, we're collaborating externally. Where are those users coming from? So now we get to track the actual domains that those users are a part of. So I can see the domain information, the number of external users, and now we're seeing detailed report on those. And so you can imagine if I'm collaborating on a consistent basis with someone that's trusted, then I can actually tell Insights, Miriam is a trusted user. So let's put her in a special category where now the risk or knowledge of this external user is a little bit more accepting to us in terms of our analysis because of our relationship with her. So we can flag her as that trusted user there, right? So in addition to that, we can see even more detail around, what has he or she accessed. So this is very insightful into seeing, what were the activities this particular user did and when did they perform those activities. We can see all that information here. And the beauty of this is we can also export that out if we need to, right? So another nice feature to have to be able to keep that for historical purposes, or again, to provide that to an auditor, for example, there. All right. Let's go back to our external users here. And so you can see here, if I take a look at Adele, again, this is how we can trust her. We can remove a trusted user list. We can even block the user from signing in if we deem that this user is a potential risk. We can do that very easily from the UI here. Okay, either from the menu or from the context here, block signing user, and we can even remove the user from Azure Active Directory. So nice feature there. All right. The other side here is getting into the status of those active users. This is also important because a lot of times we invite users into our tenancy and then sometimes they get lost. And so we can track, whether they're still being used or orphaned or not being used. We can track that and report on that as well. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at external links. So now we're getting into another key scenario is if you're allowing external links to be shared, either internally or even externally, we want to be aware of that. What type of links, the anonymous links or links to specific users, we can see those. But more importantly, we can actually do things like unshare the link. If that's a potential risk here, and again, we're highlighting that on this column here, sensitivity level, I can see, this is sensitive. And the reason why is because we found a credit card match. Therefore, I can unshare this, or I can set an actual expiration date to say, yep, this will close down at a particular time if I need to there. So nice feature there, all within the UI to be able to identify that and remove that access there. At the top, we can do quick filters on which ones are maybe medium sensitivity and reduce our result set here and focus our investigation around that. And you get the idea of, block downloads where we've applied that. You can see that there. Download has been blocked. Yep. So a couple of ways we can apply actions and restrict certain views from happening if need be there. All right. And the final area here, which is one of my favorites, is this is a huge challenge natively. You don't have a way in Microsoft today where you can actually type in a user's name, whether they're internal, right, or external, and say, yeah, tell me everything Adele has access to across my major workspaces where collaboration happens. So I'll leave it on all workspaces here and I'll click search. And so what we're doing here is querying the active permissions and M365 and returning that here within Insights and saying, here's Adele. She is an external user, and this is what she has access to by sites or by objects. And so having this view makes it very easy for me to see details. We talked about that on the file, the permissions, and the activities performed on the file. And I can see that very nicely here, all within this particular view here. So if I look at this particular team of HR, I can see the details here. This is a team. It has a site collection for storing the data for the team, and I can see the information there. I can also look at the activities that have occurred on this particular file. The basic information up top, and then the audit activities within this particular time frame here. So that's a very popular feature of Insights, being able to perform that user or group search and get a live snapshot of active permissions and activities for that particular query search there. All right. So let's go down into administration now. The other piece I wanted to mention here is obviously we can track from an auditing perspective who's making changes, what are they doing inside of Insights, system events. Account management is really what we call delegated administration. So I mentioned in my opening, I'm a administrator for my tenancy here. But there will be probably scenarios where you want to delegate this out to a practice, maybe your bank of customers. So that's where that whole container grouping comes into play. We can place all of the objects in a specific container, and then we can give that container access within Insights to an individual or a team of individuals, and they can get all the insight information for their practice or department or division. So that's where account management comes in. You can delegate the Insights tool to those individuals there. Notification settings, how you want to be alerted when certain things happen. That's very easy to do. And then the new feature here, we just added this recently from our regular update interval, is being able to track external users that are really part of your normal collaboration. Some people call these, the vendors, VDash, or contractors, being able to identify those individuals that are inside your company directory. So this was a common request from a lot of our customers. So we were able to add that into the recent release there. So let's go back up to the top here. And again, as a quick recap on Insights, very intuitive, nice user-friendly tool for the user that's consuming this, that needs to get deeper insights into what's happening within a particular modality or workload. And you can see here in Teams, I can see my external users. The 9/12 means that we have 12 total, but we have 3 that are trusted. And so that's why we have the indicator there for the 9-3 there, right? So 9 are external, 3 of those are what we call trusted in that example. And you can see here for Teams, we have identified 20 external links, and you can see those here. And then as we showed you earlier, I can unshare those or set expiration based upon my analysis and investigation there. And finally here, I can click in and drill down into the sensitive items that have been found within Teams. We have about 50 here. And as we talked about that, you can see the individual files. Maybe I have several pages, depending upon how much content that is, and the different actions I can perform, detailed information, view permissions, and I can make modifications if I need to there. So good insights into the various workloads here. And another interesting insight here is what we call Teams without available owners. So this is your normal attrition potentially where someone was made an owner of a team, but they're no longer in the org. Their account has been disabled, license removed. So now that's an orphan team potentially. And so we can easily identify those and, take a look, grant permissions, and maybe hand this off to another business contact to either identify if this still is needed or replace the ownership there. So very important insight into, again, those orphan uh, teams there. Teams with private channels is another important insight to understand where private channels are being created and having insights into that. So that's another popular one as well. And then we talked about this team with high risk items. I can click on this and again see where the high risk items have been identified within specific teams. So quick tour specifically in the workload of teams there on some of that insights that we're presenting up to the dashboard. Nice and clean information to consume there. And the final thing I'll mention here is that if you need to, maybe you really want to get a high level type of report out to maybe upper management or an auditor, we do have the ability to export this particular dashboard view out for consumption. And that gives you a nice PDF view that gives you some charts and kind of the high level graphs you see here in the screen here. So that's insights. So now let's pivot over to the pairing solution called policies. So just like insights, we're going to greet the admin or user that's been granted access, the ability to see information from the dashboard here. And so, like we talked about, policies is really about being proactive, reducing what we call configuration drift. And what we mean by that is I'm an owner of a team that gives me a lot of power. I can make a lot of setting changes for my team or teams. Some of those settings or changes may not be allowed, but there's nothing really preventing me from doing that. So as an organization that needs to have secure collaboration, we may want to put a policy in that restricts certain changes from being made. We have a couple of policies that we've added to help some customers or your practice get started. Some of the common ones are content sensitivity control, right? So we can take a look at a couple of the rules here around controlling, content. And I'll get into this in a bit and show you how you can configure some of the rules to help you monitor, look for those settings, revert those settings back in an automated fashion there. So that's one example. Data protection is another template that you can easily provide in terms of what permissions can be granted or changed within a team. And then the final one here on the template is external sharing controls. So these templates are kind of the way in which you can easily get started if you know you have something you want to control from a sensitive perspective, data protection, or external sharing. Easy ways to get started with those. But what I'm going to show you here is how you can create your own. We call this individual services as one. And you can see I have a couple of examples here where I've created specific policies on specific work spaces or workload types. You can see teams, you can see groups, and you can see SharePoint sites here. So I have a couple of examples. So let's take a look. So imagine scenarios where maybe across OneDrive for Business, I don't want to allow direct sharing. I want to prevent users from directly sharing content to individual users and groups from within their OneDrive, right? So I can easily create a rule that allows me to do that as one example. If I click add rule here, now you get access to the out of the box rules that have been pre um, set up or part of your rule set that you can actually choose and then configure what options you want to enforce for this rule for a particular workspace, OneDrive, Teams, or a SharePoint site. So you can see the icons that indicate where this rule can be applied. You can see the ones there that apply to SharePoint and OneDrive. And then we have rules that apply to all of the workloads and so on and so forth there. So because I selected OneDrive for Business, this determines what listing of rules are available for me to configure for this workspace. So if I wanted to restrict someone from deleting content, I could easily create a rule that says only certain people are allowed to delete content. And so I start typing their name in here and it will query them from the directory. And for example, Adele is allowed, or I can create a group called East Coast users and say, yep, East Coast users, they are allowed to delete um, content um, within the site. Or I can perform the opposite um, um, approach and specify um, users that are not allowed to perform this operation here. So West Coast users are restricted from performing the action. Now, we can monitor this and notify, for example, the admins. If that's the case, we want to notify Nestor whenever this rule detects someone trying to perform this, or if it actually happens, the violations have been identified, we can actually revert those back. So this is the power of a rule set in that the policies for Microsoft 365 by AvePoint can actually revert changes, actions that have occurred. We can roll those back, right? And then notify personnel of those particular violations. So very powerful to create those rules, and you can build out your rule set there based upon your requirements for a particular workspace there. How often do these rules run? We are being good stewards here at AvePoint, and we understand the importance of throttling a Microsoft tenant. So the lowest interval that we can scan and look for this type of policy setting infraction violation is 2 hours. And so again, that's being good stewards, not to impact your tenant where you can't do normal operations, time of day, those kind of scenarios, up to, as often as you want across weeks there. So different scan intervals, and we can retain the data associated with that policy up to 30 days there. And you have some filtering for scenarios where you don't want to apply this policy to a specific sites or pieces of data within a tenancy there. So those are your settings when it comes to editing a policy. And if I go back here, and you see I have several of these that I've applied across a couple of different workloads. In this example, where we're restricting non-US personnel from being added to a team, either through the membership of a team or user group restriction. And so we have rules in place to look for that and potentially make those changes, revert those back if that happens there. So a good example of how you can be proactive in access to, again, reduce your risk exposure to those crown jewel assets in your collaboration. Now, other areas where we can apply rules and be proactive is at your tenant level. So this is a great example where maybe you have, a team of admins that you want to ensure that no one changes a particular setting when it comes to, for example, Exchange, some of the Exchange settings around outbound spam prevention, right? So you can create a rule around protecting your organization from outbound spam. This is applied at your tenant level. That's one rule. Your malware prevention. You can notify, different recipients here, put in a policy name, protect your organization by quarantining email messages where, malware is detected. That's another policy at a tenant level. A couple other ones here, specifically around ghost guest user detection. So anytime we do a query and detect your guest users don't have any membership to any sites, groups, or teams, we can identify those, notify your admins if we need to, or we can take it further and actually remove them from the directory if need be. So this is a rule that runs at your tenant level to find those guest users and perform the configurations you have to find. So a couple different ways we can put in those proactive settings at your tenant level there. Okay. Reporting is, again, allowing you to get insights into what policies are being assigned. You can see that information and then be able to report that. Different workspaces, the specific workspaces within your tenancies. You can assign a policy, you can edit a policy that's being applied to a team, a group, a SharePoint site. You can easily manage that from this particular workspace view here. So for example, operations, this Microsoft group here, I can actually, assign a policy that's available to me, or I can edit the one that's been applied, and you can see I can easily make those changes there if I need to, or add in another rule from the rule set that's available. For example, restrict the changes of the privacy level when it comes to teams or groups, always enforce public, always enforce private. And if the owner, there is an owner, he tries to make those changes, then we can reset it back to what we defined it as, for example, there. So easily manageable workspaces in terms of what policies are being inherited or applied at the workspace level there. Okay. And as we wrap up here, again, this is just giving you a lot of flexibility to define and report on your various policies to, again, be very proactive in terms of reducing your overall risk, controlling sprawl, setting drift, and being very compliant for your secure collaboration within your organization. Okay, as we wrap up, so now if we go back to our example of an external user that has access to a team, now working with policies and insights, this is much, much easier. So now we can actually see what Roy has access to. We can see how long Roy has access to a particular file. And we also know if that file is sensitive. So we can see all that information. And if we need to restrict Roy or change Roy's access, we can do that very easily through the policy and insights solution we just demoed there. And so now, if Sarah needs to grant Roy access to the file, but we reverted it, and we send Sarah a notification as to why, based upon, again, hey, Roy should not have access. We have a proactive policy that restricts that behavior. So now we have policies to help us reduce risk and secure our collaboration. So, in summary, policies and insights quickly identify, fix exposure, focus on the hot spots or where your risk is most critical within your organization, help you prove success and help you maintain order. So we can do that by looking for specific keywords, sensitive info types, sensitivity labels. We can look for external users and again, put a proactive policy to help you control that and then be able to report on that, give you valuable insights into that. Reducing the challenges of native policies and trying to do this natively across all the different security and compliance portals, trying to leverage heavy, very complex PowerShelling, instead of having to go to permission reports with PowerShell, looking at DLP reports and audit logs. Insights bubbles all this up and presents it to you in a nice, clean dashboard interface. And again, no bottlenecking in terms of getting to that information because we're doing very um, uh, fast querying to get that information as quickly as possible to you that's current. And then again, proactive policies that are run on a very respectful interval where we're not hammering your tenant, causing throttling, but we're also being very efficient in terms of checking for those policies and making rollback changes if configured there with the ability to fix and monitor that. And finally, you can delegate this to other practices and focus on specific areas, customers, or within a particular business. You can delegate this to a business lead, practice, and have them be able to see that information for their objects, their workloads that they are responsible for there. So that is all we have for this particular session. I want to thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or follow-ups, please refer to the information here. And thank you for your time. Have a good day.